How did a stingray that was alone in a tank for a number of years all of a sudden get pregnant with 4 pups? We're going to find out on today's episode of Ocean Talk. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ocean Talk. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is where I talk all things ocean so you can understand what's happening with the ocean and how you can live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a round stingray, a species of stingray that is in an aquarium that's in North Carolina Aquarium and Shark Lab. And we're going to talk about how it got pregnant without any males around at all. This mystery has kind of gone viral, but scientists have known why this has happened for quite a long time. It just doesn't happen often, and I don't know if it's ever happened in an aquarium. So we're going to find out what really made this thing really go on. And to think about that, you have to really understand what happens in the ocean, in the wild, not in an aquarium, but in the wild. It could be a lonely place. The ocean is a huge place. It covers over 70% of the planet, and there are a lot of species in it, but there's also a lot of space. And so when a stingray or any other animal gets into the ocean or is born, it goes to the ocean. When it reaches adulthood, it's able to reproduce. It's got to find a mate. And sometimes a mate's not around. If you're in an area where there's not a lot of other stingrays, in this case, another round stingray, you may not be able to mate. So you have to find out a way to reproduce, because the goal of every species is to reproduce, is to pass on your genes to the next generation. That's the goal of just life in general. Even us as humans, our goal is to pass on our genes to the next generation so that our species survives another generation and another generation and another generation after that, and so on and so on. But if we don't pass on our genes, or we don't pass on the right genes or a diversity of genetic material, then things happen like climate change, and things can really extirpate or kind of put a species on notice of extinction just by not having a good amount of genes or the right amount of genes that's going to help you to get to the next generation. So for instance, when you have a diverse habitat, let's just say, so a diverse habitat in an ocean, say a coral reef, where you have a number of different corals that typify that area. It makes the coral reef a habitat that a lot of fish can come to, and a lot of invertebrates. They can get protection, they can get food, they can reproduce themselves there. It's a nice little home for them. If some of those corals go away, if they die off for whatever reason, say climate change, say the ocean heats up, ocean gets acidified, and all of a sudden some corals can't reproduce, or some corals can't survive to the next generation, or even the next generation after that, and they get extirpated, so they're extinct from a specific area. That could affect the entire coral reef if there's not a diverse number of species within the corals, right? Corals are animals. They have a lot of different types of corals that will typify, that will make up a coral reef, and that will cause a lot of animals to be attracted to it as a habitat. But if one species, say like the reef building species of that area, the one that's dominant, if that gets extirpated, if it dies off, then all the other species of coral that may or may not be there may become the big typifier and may attract certain species over others. We just don't know. It really depends on the situation. What you want to do is you want to keep those species there. Well, within a species, genetic material really matters, the diversity of genetic material. And we see this all the time. Some individuals of species dying off because they have a certain genetic makeup. Maybe some can handle higher temperatures than others, and those that can't handle higher ocean temperatures will eventually die off because the ocean is heating up. But the ones that can, the individuals of that species that can handle it will stick around. But if all the genetics is the same, and there's less diverse, and none of the genes of that species can handle hot temperatures, then they're going to die off, and that's going to be a shame. That's what we want to avoid. So we want genetic diversity within a species, within a population. Back to the stingray in the wild, it wants to mate with other individuals from the same species to mix up their DNA, to mix up that genetic material so they get a diverse genetic material, right? That's the joy of being able to reproduce with another mate, is they have different genetic makeup. You mate with them, they have that genetic makeup. The offspring have, basically half and half, or, a mix of that DNA, and then they go on to the next generation. It ends up being a really good deal for that offspring. It gives them a chance to survive another generation. But if there's no mate around, right, the species still has to reproduce. It still wants to pass off its gene to the next generation, but there's nothing to reproduce with. It's got to figure out its own. And some species will do, like just like this round stingray, will go through parthenogenesis. Essentially what happens is you have an egg that will be produced. It'll fuse to the wall of the stingray, the mother, and that will cause cell diffusion. And then an embryo is made. So this embryo will develop into a pup, in this case, 4 pups. But the thing is, the DNA is going to be the exact match of the stingray. This is what researchers are thinking. So if essentially Charlotte the Stingray, which is the name of the stingray that in question, will be able to pass on her genes. It's just the exact same genes in the 4 pups because it reproduced through parthenogenesis and not through sexual mating and not through sexual reproduction. So that's essentially the mystery. It went viral around, around the internet, which is kind of cool to see because it's nice for people to learn about parthenogenesis. There are a lot of people who are like, oh man, this is like a Maury Povich show. If you don't know who Maury Povich is, it's a talk show that was hosted by a guy named Maury Povich. He was popular for having a lot of different topics on. It was kind of trashy back in the day in the 90s and early 2000s. And so people would go on and they would, especially when it was really known for, people would go on and mothers and potential fathers would be wondering if it's their baby, and they would do a genetic test and then they would say, yes, the baby is yours, or the baby's not yours, and they would cheer all over the place. And it would be kind of a weird show, just in terms of like a reality thing, probably the birth of reality, but it was something that was entertaining back then. But this is not the case. We don't know who the father is. We don't know if there's really a father. There probably isn't. And there will be genetic testing on the 4 pups once they're born, which will any day now apparently, and we're going to find out if the genetics is the same, which is what Katie Lyons, one of the researchers at the Shark Lab at North Carolina Aquarium, is hypothesizing. And we're going to find out if it's the exact same DNA. If not, we're going to find out who that father is, and maybe there'll be an underwater Maury Povich show. Maybe hosted by SpongeBob? I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. I just thought it would be interesting to find out. You probably saw the headlines of this viral story somewhere on your social media sites. And so I thought I would answer that question if you haven't received the answer. If not, there's a link in the description below. I want to hear your thoughts if you think this is going to be an exact DNA match, or do you think there's a father that snuck in? Some are hypothesizing that an actual shark, like your typical what looks like a shark, actually mated with them. There's no evidence of that. And obviously they've dispelled that myth because there hasn't been a shark in that area for a while. So we'll see what happens soon. Love to hear what you think in the comments below. And of course, if you want to hear more of this kind of stuff, and if you want to hear more things about the ocean, you can subscribe and hit that notification bell. I post every Tuesdays and Thursdays. And of course, if you want to hear a lot more, you can go to my audio podcast, How to Protect the Ocean. Follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and I can see you there. And thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Ocean Talk. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.